All right, we're going to talk about making pop-up prongs today. Pop-up prongs are ways that you can store objects. So for instance, this is an earring here. It has a stone at the bottom, and there's metal wrapping around that stone so that it can be easily attached to other pieces. Here's another example of pop-up prongs. So this is a necklace that has some ceramic tiles that are then held in place with these metal pieces. And you can see on the back where the prongs came from, just the sheet metal underneath. So this process takes a lot more planning than some of the other ones we've looked at before. So this is why this packet that I've given you is really, really helpful, and it lists step by step how to do each of these stages. So please feel free to use this as reference as you go through, because it really explains it all in great detail. And also on the back, it shows some variations that I'm really not showing unless you're very excited about it, like using curved shapes or suspending objects and having negative space around it. All right, so today I'm going to talk about planning with your object. It's very important with something like this that you do a lot of planning. So I made the decision that I wanted to make a cuff, and I have a stone that I want to attach to that cuff. It's a rounded stone, it's not too heavy, it's one that I kind of just like a lot, so I'm going to be able to incorporate that into my design. So first thing I did was I took a piece of paper that was longer than what I thought I needed for my wrist, and I did some measuring by wrapping it around, and I did this with a lot of planning, and I have another video dedicated to getting ideal shapes and figuring out the length, so feel free to use that if you want. I figured out what my length needed to be, and I have that right here. And then I started sketching a couple different shapes, and this is the shape that I finally went with. I decided I'm going to cut out these two negative spaces, and I drew exactly where my stone was going to be, and I traced it. If you notice, I left some metal around the edges. That's a really important part so that your piece doesn't get distorted when you pull up the prongs. So here I have the piece. I attached my paper to my metal, and I've started to cut it out. I haven't finished that yet, but I wanted to talk about how you figure out what types of prongs you need and some variations on what we have here. So I have drawn a couple here that you can look at. This one is pretty complex. This is kind of a C, so if you were drawing that, let me do it right up here so you can see. If this is where my object was going to go, and my metal is on top and on the bottom, if you were going to cut that out of metal, you would actually cut something that looks like this and has a cutout area on the middle. Then I would be able to lift it up and then drape it over. More of a basic one here is more of like an angular shape. You can also round it, and the length of it will depend on the object that you're containing. If it's a taller object, you need a longer one. Here I just drew one that was kind of a squiggle, so if you want to play around with something that's more organic, you can. And then the last one I showed, I was kind of thinking along the lines of a diamond, something a little more complex in shape. All of them will change the look of what you have. The ones that I have done on the piece that I just showed you, these are kind of triangles that have a curved end on them. These ones are more triangular, but they're a little bit sharper. Okay, so while you're thinking about this, you have to think about how many prongs you're going to need. You either think 3 to 4 is pretty typical, 2 is usually not enough, and you also want to be able to see the object, so you don't want too many that it would cover up. So the first thing you do when you're figuring this out is you find about the center point, and that's where all of your prongs are going to come off of. So this is where I'm considering my center point before I begin actually drawing the shape of the prongs. It's also nice to look at where your object is and look at the edge. So right here I've got a straighter edge. So if I choose to put a prong coming this way, when I go to lift that metal up and fold it over, it will fold in a straight direction. Now instead, if I were to pick something like this area, which is much more curvy, and have a prong come down, it would have a difficult time getting close enough to the edge of the object. So I'm going to start with one prong there, and I think I'm going to do one on this straight area at the top, coming down, and then I'm going to do 2 more, so I have to make a decision here. This is a straighter area, so I'm going to do that also. And then lastly, Maybe I'll do one right at the bottom here. Okay, my object is really low to the ground, so if you look at it, it's not very thick, maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick. So I actually don't need prongs that are this long. This is a little longer than I'm gonna need. If my object were much thicker, a stone like this, I would have to think about creating much bigger prongs to be able to get around the side and really contain it. But I purposely picked one that was a little bit thinner. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to start from here, drill a hole, and then I can go and shape, and I'm actually going to cut so my actual prongs will be a lot